Hashem, today's daf yomi is Shevuos Lamed Zayin, Shevuos 37. Today's daf is dedicated for a shmir for the Chayalim, Matzah for the Shuyim, and a Yeshua for Am Yisrael, and this Ace Sarah. We're going to start on the bottom. Today's daf is Shevuos Lamed Zayin, and we're going to start on the bottom of Lamed Vav Amud Beis 36b, 2 lines from the bottom. Gemara says, Rav Acha bar Huna, Rav Shmuel Berei de Rav bar Chana, Rav Yitzchak Berei de Rav Uda Tanu Shevuos Be'Rabba, that they were studying Shevuos in the yeshiva of Rabbah. And again, just a reminder, we were discussing in this chapter what's called the Shevuos HaPikadon, the oath of the person who had a deposit in his property, an oath of deposit. So it says in this converse, hold on, let me just press do not disturb so I don't get texted. Okay, so he says they Pagabu Rav Kahana. So Rav Kahana met them, and Rav Kahana says to them, Amaru, Hizi b'shvuas hapikadon v'hisrubo mahu. So the question really, as we'll see from the Gemara, is let's say a person intentionally lies about this oath of a deposit, and he was warned. Meaning to say, so since he was warned, is the punishment going to be a korban? Well, usually a korban is not brought in the case where you're warned, or is the punishment going to be lashes? So therefore, is he going to bring the korban asham? Is he going to be getting lashes, or does he get both? So what's going to be the situation here? He was warned first. Hisrubo. He intentionally violated this oath of deposit, and first he was warned. What's the law? Do we say kevan the chidushu, since this is something that breaks the normal rules, since it's something that doesn't fit within the normal rules, the B'kol Torah Kula Moashkal Mezid Maisi Karban. Generally speaking, in the rest of the Torah, although there are some exceptions, we don't find that somebody who intentionally does a sin brings a korban. And here, even though he does it intentionally, he brings a korban. Therefore, it doesn't matter whether he's warned or not, he's going to bring the korban. Odilma, or perhaps we say, Hani Mili, when do we say that he brings the korban? Only in a situation where he's not first warned. But where he was first warned, Milka Lucky. In the case where he was warned, he'll get the lashes, but he will not bring the korban. Or maybe we do both. He's going to bring the korban and get lashes. So this was the question that Rav Kahana said to the Chevra coming out of the yeshiva. Amrulay, so the Chachamim responded to Rav Kahana, Tanina. We learned in the Brisa, Chanura Himena Shevuos HaPikadon, that the Shevuos HaPikadon is more severe than the Shevuos HaEdus, Shechayavin Al Zedona Makos, that we're liable if we do it intentionally. You're going to be liable for the Makos penalty. Val Shigagasam Asham Bekesef Shkolim, and if you do it accidentally, you bring a korban asham, that has to be worth a minimum of 2 selah. So we see from here that you do get lashes. From the fact that you get, if you do it intentionally, you get lashes. This proves that they warned him. The ka'amar makos in korban lo, and it says in the brisa that if you do it intentionally, you get the lashes, but not if you do it accidentally. And so therefore we answer the question. So if that's the question, umay chumra. So why is the Shevuos HaPikadon more severe than the Shevuos HaEdus? So because person would rather bring a korban and not get lashes. And so he would rather get the punishment for Shevuos HaEdus, which is a korban, than the punishment for Shevuos HaPikadon, which is lashes if he was warned. So we see from here that somebody who's warned about a Shevuos Apikadon, and then he does it anyway, gets Makos and does not bring a carbon. However, Amrlu Rava Bar Isi, he says, no, this is a minority position. This brisa that says that you get lashes and you don't bring a carbon is a minority position. Matana Zadon Shevuos Apikadon Oniten Kapara. Who is the one who says that if you intentionally violated Shevuos Apikadon, you don't bring a carbon? That's Rabbi Shimon. That's only the minority position of Rabbi Shimon. Avol Rabbanan, carbon nami maisi. But according to Rabbanan, if you, in addition to Makos, you bring a carbon. So the Gemara says, Amru Rav Kahana bar minei da'ahi. Rav Kahana said, leave aside that brisa, the anan taninoe, because I taught this brisa, v'hachi taninoe. We're in the middle of Lamed Zayin Amid Aleph, and we're discussing the case of a person who is warned. What we said so far is a person who's warned before violating the Shevuos Apikadon. Does he get lashes, or does he get a carbon, or does he get both? So the first position, the brisa we saw says that he got lashes. Gemara assumes that that's the halacha. You get lashes and not a carbon. But then Rava Bar Isi says, no, this brisa is just a minority opinion. It's just the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, which is a minority position. Rav Kahana said, no, Bar Minei Dahi. Don't say that. Danan Taninoe. I taught this brisa. And this is the way I taught this brisa. You can't bring a proof from that brisa. Why? Because the way I taught it was echad zedona ve'echad shegaga ashar mekesef shkalim. That whether it was intentional or accidental, you brought that the Shevuos Apikadon is more severe than the Shevuos Eidus, because whether it was done accidentally or intentionally, you both bring the asham. Meaning to say that if you did it b'mezid, you only bring a carbon, just like if you did it accidentally. And in this case, umay chumra, why is this therefore more severe than the Shevuos Apikadon? Dilu hasam, because in the case of the Shevuos Ha'edus, chatas bas danka, if you violate the Shevuos Ha'edus, you bring a chatas, sin offering, and it only has to be worth the minimum amount, which can even be just a sixth of a dinar. But here by carbon asham, the minimum is much greater. Because the asham mekesef shkalim, it has to be at least 2 shekels of silver. So therefore, we see that it's more severe. So then the Gemara says, well, if that's the case, ligmor minei. Well, why don't we learn from here that you don't get makos, that you get a carbon and not lashes? The Gemara says, no, dilma de lo asrbe. Maybe that's a case where he wasn't warned, so you can't learn anything from that brisa. Gemara says, well, the next language, Lishna Achrina, Lishna Achrina usually introduces an alternative version of the discussion, but here it's not clear that that's what's going on. It's just bringing another proof from our Mishnah. Tashma, let's bring a proof from our Mishnah to answer this question. It says, Ein chayavin al shigigasa. A Shevuos Apikadon, you're not liable if you did it accidentally. Ma'in chayavin al zedona. And what is a person liable for if he does it intentionally? Al shemekesef shkalim. He has to bring, if he does it intentionally, he brings carbon asham worth 2 shekel. And says the Gemara, my lab b'das. They are only talking about a case where you were warned and you did it intentionally. Gemara says, no, it's not the case. Maybe he wasn't warned, and that's why he's doing it. So there's no proof. Tashma. So we'll bring a proof from a brisa. The first part, the Gemara is only citing the second part of the brisa. The first part of the brisa was saying that there are certain laws which apply to a nazir becomes tamei and also applies to Shevuos Apikadon. The Gemara now rejects that. It says, "Lo imamarta ben nazir tamei." You can't compare a nazir tamei to a Shevuos Apikadon because a nazir tamei shekain loka. He gets lashes. Tomar b'Shevuos Apikadon she'eino loka. The oath of the Shevuos Apikadon, he doesn't get lashes. So that answers that question. Midikamarlo, from the fact that we say that the Nazir tummy gets lashes, we call the Alshabay. Proves he was warned. Mikamar Tomar B'Shuasab because She'enu that he doesn't get lashes of a carbon micey, but he gets a carbon. So haven't we answered this question then? Gemara says, no. What does it mean when it says my eno loka? What does it mean when we say that Shavuos Apikadon does not get lashes? It means the eno niftar b'malchus. It means he's not completely exempt with lashes because he also has to bring a carbon. Miklal, do you mean to say the Nazir Tameh niftar b'malchus? You mean to say the Nazir is Tameh with lashes? A carbon ksive. He also brings a carbon if he was Tameh. That's this week's parasha, by the way. The Nazir brings the he brings the two animals if he is Tameh. It says in the Torah. He brings the two birds and a carbon alsham. So the Gemara says, no. Hasam the maisi carbon kehechi de techol alei naziris patara. No, there in the case of the Nazir, when he's bringing the carbon, it's not to get a kapara. He's bringing it only to start over the Naziris. So we haven't answered our question yet. So the Gemara says, again, we're discussing the question of Rav Kahana, which is if the person was warned by witnesses before the Shavuos Apikadon, does he get lashes or a carbon or both? So the Gemara says, Amru Rabbanan Kamei de Rabba. So the Rabbanan said Rav Kahana's question in front of Rabba. Amru Rabba says, Miklal from Rav Kahana's question, the implication is that if he was not warned, if he was not warned, the Ika Edim, and there were witnesses, Mechayev, that he would be obligated to bring a carbon. But why? Kfiras Dvarim Ba'amahu. Why would he have to bring a carbon under those circumstances? Kfiras Dvarim Ba'amahu. The fact that they'll say that he's lying, they're just hold on. He's just lying about certain facts associated with the case, but that wouldn't be what requires him to bring the carbon. What requires him to bring the carbon is only if he does the Shavuos Apikadon. Somebody denies something under a Shvuah and there are witnesses, Potter is exempt from bringing a carbon. So Amalei Rab Chanina Rabba Tanya the Messiah. I'll bring you a proof that supports this. It says about a Shavuos Apikadon, the Chichei Shpa. It says he denied the claim. So Prat L'moda Le'echa Min Ha'achen or Le'echa Min Ha'shutfin. This excludes a case. It says about the Shavuos Apikadon, the Chichei Shpa. This excludes a case where he admits it to one of the partners, one of the brothers, or one of the partners, the Nishbal Sheker, and he swore falsely to the other one. And also excludes the case of somebody who borrowed money with a document and he lies about it. Or he lies about, and there are witnesses to the fact. So we see from here, from the Lova Be'edim, we see that when the Edim know that it's false, he doesn't bring a carbon. So, and therefore, this is what Rava said. So this is exactly, this price is supporting Rava's idea that if he denies something which there are witnesses to, then he wouldn't bring this carbon for. And Rava we see this on the basis of Rabba's question. Because Rabba had said to them that if they didn't warn him and there were witnesses, he'd be liable. But why? Kfiras Dvarim Ba'amahu. Because since there are witnesses, his denial is basically irrelevant. It's not accomplishing anything. And that's Rava's position. So if that's the case, Rabba seems to be challenging Rav Kahana. So Amrulay, Rabba says back to Rav Chanina, no, the basis for my opinion is not based upon that price. That price is not necessarily the case because it could be, but Omer Laviti, he could say we could say that the Bryce is not discussing a case where he denies an obligation that they know about, but rather, Ba'omer Laviti, V'lo Laviti Be'edim, he said, I borrowed the money, but I didn't borrow in the witnesses. Laviti, V'lo Laviti B'shtar, or I borrowed it, or now it's a contract. Meaning to say, it could say that he's lying about something that's not necessarily relevant in order to establish whether he owes the money back. That's where he's exempt. But if he actually denied it, he would be chayav. So the Gemara says, Mimai, how can you say that? Midiktani v'chicheshpa, means to say from the first part, it says if you denied it to one of the brothers, or where you admitted to one of the brothers, one of the partners, how could it be to one of the brothers? The odile palga day. If you say he admitted, I owe you your half, how you could fear the idach, and the other one is a rejection. No, so must be, he said, you borrowed from both of us. He said, no, I didn't borrow from both of you. But I did borrow from one of you. It's just an inconsequential denial because he still owes back the money. And from the fact that the first clause is kfiras dvarim ba'alma, seifanami kfiras dvarim ba'alma. And so it proves that the second part is also dealing with that fact. And so therefore, we can't prove Rabba's principle. So basically, the Brisa is dealing with where it's a denial that's not consequential. So now we're still discussing Rabba's idea that you don't have to bring a carbon for a Shevuos Apikadon, which can be basically proved to be false from other facts. So the way to remember this is Siman Chova Kitos Tebal Bayis. Tashma, how come and proof? It says in our Mishnah, he's not liable if he didn't have any evidence, if he thought he was telling the truth. It's a complete accident. What does it mean in the case? What is he liable for the intentional violation? Asham bekesef shkolim. He has to bring a carbon asham worth 2 shkolim. Ma'alav zadon edim. Are we talking about a case where, how do we know he's lying completely? Because there are witnesses there. And so we see from here that even though they know it, witnesses know it, he brings a carbon. And this is a direct refutation of Rabbah. The Gemara says, no, Zadon Atzma. He himself, he knew he was lying. But if there were witnesses, maybe he would not have to bring a carbon. Tashma, Hayushtei Kite Edim. Let's say we have this from the earlier Mishnah on Lamed Aleph. It says if there were 2 groups of witnesses, Kafra Rishona, if the first group denied it, Kafra Ashniya, and then the second one denied it, they're both liable. But both of them could have upheld the testimony. That's why Shevuos Edus. I understand why the second one is liable to Kafra Kas Rishona, because the first one had denied it, so they were the last defense in the testimony. Why is the first one liable? The second one is still there. And so we see, that from the fact that the first group is liable, we see that we look at the first group on its own, and we don't take into account the second group. And so too, we should look at the Shevuos Apikadon on its own, and we shouldn't look at the fact that other witnesses know it's false. So Amar Avina, Hachamayaskina, no, this case, with the Mishnah Shevuos Ha'edus is referring to Kagon Sha'isa Shnia, B'Shas Kfiras Harishona, Krovim and Shosein. Talking about where the second group, at the time where the first group denied it, the second group wasn't capable of testifying. But in a case where they were capable of testifying, indeed, the first group would be off the hook. And why weren't they capable? Because they were related at that time, and then later on they weren't. So Gemara says, well, obviously they're liable. So Gemara says, no, the Chiddush in the show saying goes to Sos. Their wives were about to die. So Ma'adatema Rav goes to Lamisa, who might have thought, well, they should have known that the second group, they shouldn't be responsible because the second group is about to be able to testify. They're still not dead, and so therefore the first group at that point is going to be considered liable. Gemara again questions Rabbah. Tashma Balabaya Shatoin Tanas Gonna Pikadon. So let's say there's a person who claimed, you have my stolen deposit with you, you have my watch with you. Vinishba, and the person swore falsely, Vahoda, and then he admitted it, Uvo Adim, and then witnesses came and said that he took this item. If this person admitted it before the witnesses came, then he has to bring the carbon asham and he pays back the money, the restitution, plus 1/5. But if after the witnesses came, he testified, if only after the witnesses came did he admit it, then then he brings the carbon and he pays back the double payment like he stole it. So we see from here that even when there were witnesses in the first case, he still brings a carbon asham. So Gemara says, no, hachinami kid Ravina. No, we could give the same answer that Ravina gave, that at the time the people who knew he stole it were relatives, and so therefore they weren't capable of testifying. That's why he brings the carbon asham there. Amalei Ravina or Ravashi, another attempt against Rabbah. Tashma chamura mimena Shevuos hapikadon. We said that in the Brisa that Shevuos hapikadon is stricter than Shevuos ha'edus. Shechayaven al zidono malchus val shigata asham hakesef shkam. Because if you do it intentionally, you're liable for lashes, and accidentally, you're liable for a carbon asham. Midikamar lokef, and the fact they get lashes, we call the ika edim. So there are witnesses. The kamar shigata asham hakesef shkam, and you still, even though there are witnesses, you bring the carbon asham. So it's against Rabbah. So Gemara says, no, Mordechai, bar minei da'i, leave that price out. Darmula hurav kahana, non-taninila. We have this price of taninila. This is how we taught it. Echad's donam, echad shigigasa, asham mekasef shkam. Meaning to say, take out the lashes, that if you did it accidentally or intentionally, you bring a carbon asham. It doesn't say anything about lashes, so it's not necessarily the case that there are witnesses. Again, the Gemara challenges Rabbah. Tashma says, "Lo emamart," from the same bride we cited above. Lo emamart ben nazir tamei shekain loke. Tomar b'shvuos hapikadon she'ein loke. If you say by nazir tamei he gets lashes, shvuos hapikadon doesn't get lashes. Now, hey dami, what is the case? Either way, edim amai loke. If there are no witnesses, why would he get lashes? El pshita the ika edim. There are witnesses. Because Tomar b'shvuos hapikadon she'ein loke. The shvuos hapikadon doesn't get lashes, even though there are witnesses. He doesn't get lashes of a carbon maisi. So even though there are witnesses, he brings the carbon. This is a direct refutation of Rabbah. The Gemara indeed says tiyufta de Rabbah tiyufta. So even though there are witnesses there, he would still bring a carbon. This is a direct refutation of Rabbah. Rabbi Yochanan Amar. Rabbi Yochanan says, "Hakofer b'mamon sheishol av edim chayiv." Rabbi Yochanan argues with Rabbah, and he says if you reject money under an oath when there are witnesses, you're still liable to bring the carbon. But if he rejects it when there's a contract, that's when he's patur. That's when he's exempt from the carbon. Amar Papa, my time at the Rabbi Yochanan, Eidei Avide de Maisi Shtar Hamanach, because the witnesses, it's possible that they're not there anymore, so they might have died, and so therefore, when he denies it, it's a meaningful denial, and so therefore, he has to bring the carbon because he committed something meaningful when he denied under oath. But the shtar, the contract is lying there, so his denial is not meaningful, so he doesn't bring the carbon. So you could lose the contract. What's the reason? Rabbi Yochanan mishum da'be shtar shibud karkaros. No, because the contract is basically a lien on somebody else's property. The aim of being carbon, I'll clear shibud karkaros. It's a technical reason. We don't bring a carbon on a contract for denying a shibud on karka. So Gemara says, Itmar mashpia ede karka. Let's see, you want to make witnesses take an oath about about his title to the land. Pligi Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar, they argue. Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Elazar, Chad Amar Chayev, Chad Amar Pater. One says you're liable, and one says that you are exempt from the Shevuos Apikadon under those circumstances. This time, the Rabbi Yochanan Amar Pater must be Rabbi Yochanan says you're exempt because I call for b'mama she'yishol of Edim Chayev Shtar Pater. So Rabbi Yochanan says you're exempt because Rafuna b'rei Rabbi Yeshua at this time. Okay, so Rabbi Yochanan is the one who says that if the Shevuos Apikadon is about karka, you're exempt. Amalei Rabbi Yirmiyah Rabbi Avo, Rabbi Yochanan Rabbi Elazar, Rabbi Puta Rabbi Elazar Rabbanan come lifli. Let's say this idea whether or not you're liable for Shevuos Apikadon on karka. Let's say, right? Not Shevuos Apikadon, Shevuos Eidus on karka. Let's say that that's the same dispute between Rabbi Eliezer and the Rabbanan. The Tanami learned Hagozol Sada Mechavero, somebody who robs a field from his friend, Shtafanar, and then the river destroyed that field. Chayav Lamilo Sada. He has to provide a different field. Give him back the field that's destroyed. And so they expound Rabbi Elazar is Riba Amit, Rabbanan Kal Prat. We already had this Gemara a couple of times. Rabbi Elazar Darash Riba Amite. It says V'chichesh B'amiso, that is the Riba. He lies to his friend, that's amplification. With Pikadon or B'tumas Yad, that's limitation. Omikol Asher Yishava, from anything that is Chazav Riba. Riba Miat Riba, Riba Akol, my Riba Kol Milli. My Miat stars. It excludes contracts. Rabbanan Darash Kal Prati. It says V'chichesh B'amito is called, but because B'tumas Yad V'gezel, that's a Prat. Call prat to call. You have to then in a prat. It has to be like the specific. Just like the specific is something that's movable and its property is money. It's inherently money. Yatsu karkos, it excludes real estate. She'im metaltel. Yatsu avodim, it excludes slaves. Shuluk shuluk karkos, which is compared to real estate. Yatsu shtaros, shaval pisha metaltel, and engufo mamon. It excludes contracts that even though they're movable, their essence is not money. So we see from here, the karka cannot be stolen, and so therefore he's not liable if they're damaged while he has them. The one who says that you're liable for Shevuos Eidus on karkas, Rabbi Eliezer, or maybe Shevuos because it's not clear, is like Rabbi Eliezer, Man the Potter, and the one who says you're exempt is Rabbanan. Gemara says no, it's not necessarily the case. Amar way, so Rabbi Avo says no. Man the Mechayev Rabbi Eliezer, Man the Potter, the one who exempts you will say to you, Amar Cha, Baha Filu Rabbi Eliezer Modeh. In this case, even Rabbi Eliezer will agree. The Rahman Amar Tzmikol V'lo Hakol. Okay, this is obviously we do this very quickly. It's a little bit technical Gemara, but God willing, on Shabbos afternoon we'll go over this. And it'll be very beautiful. Go a little slower on Shabbos. So we'll have a beautiful daf. Yasha koach to everybody.
Thank you.